Great. So I would request Pratima to present her, valuable experience and professional background with us and share a presentation. Over to you, Pratima.
Thank you, Karishma. I just wanted to first start off thanking HiCounselor for giving me this opportunity to present. I wanted to, I just have a small presentation where I'll talk about some of the things about why I started to write this book, Nevertheless She Persisted, True Stories of Women Leaders in Tech, and kind of jump into that. I'm going to share my presentation. Can folks actually see it?
Yes.
Okay. So what I want to focus on in this webinar is both helping women get into technology and also helping mid-career women thrive in leadership roles. And for those of you who are very unfamiliar with my work, I've been interviewing successful women leaders in tech for the past few years to capture their stories, mindsets, successes, and missteps, so that there is more information available about how to help women thrive in leadership in tech and beyond. If you're new to tech or you want to get into tech or more, you'll find some valuable insights in this webinar. So just jumping to the presentation. If you look at some of the numbers today, you've got 50.8% of the US population, they're women. And women are 59% of the college-educated entry-level workforce today. And 9% of management positions in IT are held by women. So it's a very, very small percentage. What's even more disturbing is if you look at Fortune 500 companies today, you have around 24 women running these companies. That means the remaining are run by men. 70% of that are run by white men. So white men are really powerful at this point in time. And we have very few women running these Fortune 500 companies. And it's even worse for women of color. So if you look at just the rate of change since the early 2000s, if you look at this, it's actually, we can feel proud about ourselves, right? We'll be like, we're constantly seeing the number of women CEOs increase since 2000. We did have a drop in 2018. We dropped down from 32 women to 24 women. And even though we're seeing this rate of change, and I'm not a sociologist, so I can't really tell you how these different dynamics that works in organizations can project some of these numbers, but if you just linearly graph this, it won't be until 3075 that we can see equal number of women CEOs at Fortune 500 companies. That is pretty scary. And I hope you all realize that 3075 is just ridiculous. We can't wait until 3075. There's another study that talks about just with the rate of change today, we won't see until 2085. And, that's my daughter, and just my work as, mother, a writer, and a female leader in tech. I wanted to create role models for my daughter because she will be in her 70s if we take the 2085 number. And she won't see equality until 2085. And if you have a daughter at home, you have a sister who's, of a younger generation, please know that this is pretty serious, that we won't be able to achieve this, 67 years from now, which I think should stop everyone in their tracks, and we should try to hasten this process. And that's been my work. What I did was I wanted to create these role models. And it wasn't just for my daughter. When I got into the mid-management level at VMware, I was very stuck in my career. And one of the reasons was that I joined a business unit that was primarily run by men. I had absolutely no sponsors. It was an old boys club. I showed great potential. Everyone talked about it, but it was hard to get into that click. That was when I decided to go off on this journey, because it wasn't just me who was struggling. There were a lot of women in my organization who were struggling. I went off to find a successful woman, because at that point I was like, where are all these women? So I dug very deep into my network, and I found around 20, 25 women who have been successful in their own right, who've been CEOs of companies, who, have been in senior VP positions, who are, women on boards, who are very high up in the engineering technical track. And I went off and I interviewed these women, and I started to tell just their personal stories. And my goal was just to have at least one person read a story and walk away with something that's meaningful to them, that could change the trajectory of their lives, and for them to go off and do something with whatever information they could gather from the stories. As I was doing research for the book, apart from just the disturbing fact that we won't reach equality until 2085, we've heard this constant thing in tech that it is a pipeline problem. But what I found is that that's actually not true. It isn't, there's several factors, but for us to constantly say it's a pipeline problem, we need to challenge that. And that's one of the action items I would like for you to take away from this, is to challenge the status quo in your organizations. When people say it's a pipeline problem, you have to educate them a bit. In this case, Telly Whitney, who's the co-founder of Grace Hopper celebrations, and if you've been to those celebrations, you will find that 23,000 young girls are at the conference learning technical, learning new technology, emerging technology. They're there to network, they're there to find jobs. And companies don't really prioritize going to these conferences to hire these women. So it's really not a pipeline problem. It is a problem where there's a lot of bias that happens within a hiring process. So, when you get resumes of a girl versus a man, a woman versus a man, and we do go through this interview panel or this hiring process, there is this bias that kicks in, which we're not aware of. And it's very unconscious. It's very unconscious bias. And what's even worse is people of color. So if you find people of color graduating from universities and they apply for positions in tech, they can't make it. I was talking to one person who, his name is Jose, and he is a technical guy. And he always told me, hey, Pratima, when they look at my name, they think I'm a house cleaner. And so we have these biases that actually prevent us from really looking hard and questioning ourselves and trying to change our mindset around this. The next thing I want to talk about is the glass ceiling. And this is, is something that I assumed was, that we had one glass ceiling, and if we broke that, there would be no other glass ceiling and we would just attain nirvana. That's actually not true. What I found is you can break a glass ceiling and there's another glass ceiling that'll emerge. And that's pretty much what happened with me. Like, I felt like I was breaking glass ceilings until I got to the mid-management level, and then I got stuck. And once I break that, I know I'm gonna have another one. And this was a similar experience with the women in the book. They experience the glass ceiling at every level, which makes it much more harder for us. The next one is imposter syndrome, and this is actually pretty close to my heart. It's just this feeling that you're not good enough. And men also feel imposter syndrome. It's just not a syndrome that women feel. And a lot of high functioning women tend to have imposter syndrome. And what I realized through just conversations with these women and talking to a lot of people out after the book was published was imposter syndrome is actually good for you. And the way it's good for you is it pushes you out of your comfort zone. So for instance, just my example, I just recently started running blockchain for VMware. And blockchain is, it's an emerging tech. There's a lot of hype around it. We're trying to make sense of what we want to do with blockchain. But at the same time, the concepts are hard in blockchain. There's cryptography, there's game theory, there's economics that you have to learn. There's, it's distributed systems as well as decentralized trust. And so there's a lot of concepts within blockchain. And when I took over the blockchain engineering team, I had imposter syndrome. I still have imposter syndrome today. But what's helped me in the last 6 to 8 months since I took over that team is I know so much more than I did before. And just going through that feeling of, oh, I don't know this, and I'm sitting in a meeting and I don't understand these concepts, and I'm supposed to run this engineering team, I went off and I took a course and I learned more. I'm doing panel talks on blockchain and I'm reading and I'm doing all these things and I feel much more confident about it, but I know I'm not there yet. And it's this constant feeling every day that I battle, but I know that I am in such a better place than I was a couple of months ago. And so imposter syndrome is actually good for you. And when you have that feeling, embrace it and do something about it. And you will find that, you know, greatness is just around the corner. And I'm not just saying it because I'm living it. The other thing I want to talk about is career interventions. And I know there's questions on how do we get women in tech? How do we get girls in tech? How do we get women to climb these ladders? And what I found is, you know, you've got the formal career interventions and you've got the informal career interventions. And some of the best career interventions you can find are these informal career interventions. This is just a perspective that people give you on just new possibilities in your career. So there are many stories in the book where people have had these informal career interventions. If you read a story by Dr. Orna Berry, she's the chief scientist. She was the first female chief scientist at Israel. And I actually met her in Israel last year. And she's a celebrity in Israel and she's fairly powerful. She used to work for EMC, now she's retired. But she talks about this story where she was driving her professor home and she just finished her master's degree and she wanted to go and start working. And you have to know that the Israeli culture is they're very big on PhDs. So her professor basically told her, he said, Orna, I won't tell you you're smart, but there are a lot of dumber people than you who have a PhD. And he said, if you want to go get a PhD, I will recommend you. And she decided to get a PhD and she told me that was the best thing ever. And she told me that the PhD actually helped her achieve a lot of things. Like she started companies, she sold companies, you know, she worked very closely with Michael Dell, Dell EMC. She works very closely with Pat Gelsinger, and she's a very successful woman in her own right. And today she is encouraging a lot of women to get PhDs. How do I feel about that? I personally, you know, I don't have a PhD and, you know, I've never felt the need to get a PhD, but just that intervention that she had that really transformed her career, and it came from her professor, which I think is very interesting. And so what that tells you is you are empowered to make those career interventions with, you know, your female colleagues or your daughter or your sister or even your mother, right? Like the women in your life, you can feel empowered to make those career interventions because you never know what that can do for them. This next one is mentorship versus sponsorship. And this is something I feel is very critical for women to get into leadership roles and get to the top. Mentors actually talk with you and sponsors talk about you. That's the difference between mentors and sponsors. And what I found is for women, women have very few sponsors. And that actually hurts them. And that's one of the reasons why you don't see them get these top leadership positions. And women also lack, you know, majority of women lack a network, a large network. And from your network, you can actually find sponsors. And we also lack network because, you know, it's hard for us with work-life balance for us to, you know, go network with people, take time off, you know, after work, hang out. A lot of these, you know, strategic decisions happen like on a golf course. And I have some funny stories in the book where they actually happen in the men's bathroom. So I found this to be critical. And when I hit my glass ceiling in 2016, that was the time I had no sponsor. I had absolutely no sponsor. I didn't have a male sponsor or a female sponsor. I didn't have anyone advocating for me. I did not have anyone saying, oh, Pratima needs this strategic project, or Pratima needs to be promoted. I did not have anyone advocating for me. But the years before that, I did have sponsors, and I didn't know they were sponsors, and they didn't know they were sponsoring me. So it's very important to be surrounded by sponsors. And the majority of the women in the book have had sponsors. There's always been somebody who is advocating for them. If you've been following Erica Lockheimer, who's in the book, she recently got promoted to VP of LinkedIn. And I know that she has many sponsors within LinkedIn, and the CEO, Jeff Weiner himself, is a sponsor of her. So it wasn't surprising that she got to the VP level. And so surrounding yourself with sponsors is very critical. And persistence, my entire book revolves around persistence. When I started to write this book, I wanted to name it There's No Glass Ceiling, because I really, really thought there was no glass ceiling for these women that I was talking to. And I realized that was very naive of me. And as I internalized their stories, there was a common theme that kept emerging, and that was persistence. So I picked a very controversial title. I've probably pissed off half the country with that title, but it was important for me to put that in there. And since then, I've realized that persistence is so key for your success. At some point you have to know which battles you want to fight versus which battles you don't have to fight. But just that grit and determination, just last night I was watching a documentary called Climbing This Mountain called Meru. It's in the Himalayan mountain, and it talks about these 3 climbers who had so much adversity. They lost people. They had, they had health problems. They had injuries. There was one guy who almost got paralyzed, but they went back and they climbed it the second time and they were successful. And all that was just persistence. It was just this mental grit that they had. And it was also something that they truly, truly, truly wanted, but they persisted through all the adversaries that came in their path. And for women or even entrepreneurs today, persistence is key, because life is not going to be easy. There's going to be so many obstacles in your way, and showing up the next day is super critical. So I talked about Orna Berry. She, the female chief scientist, she's amazing. She's got some very cool stories, and one of them was on the career intervention that I talked about. What's interesting about Patty Hatter, her story again was she was raised very similar to me, where I was raised gender blind. I never saw gender. My older sister played cricket for India, and she, won the first World Cup for the country. I watched her play cricket with the boys. My family encouraged us to do whatever we wanted to do and whatever we felt we wanted to do, and we felt we were good, or, it was never like girls do this, boys do this. And Patty was raised very similarly, but when she went to Carnegie Mellon to get her computer science degree, there was a boy named Fred in her class who came to her and said, "Hey, Patty, I'm a friend of yours, and I wanted to tell you this, and before you go down this engineering path, I want to tell you that girls don't do engineering." And for Patty, she thought it was odd because she's never been discouraged. And she looked at him and she said, "Well, thank you, but no thank you." And she went off to be on the dean's list, and Freddie dropped out of Carnegie Mellon. So it's a funny story, but also remember that the messages like this really hurt women's confidence. Patty took it the right way, but most of us are not fortunate enough to take it the right way. Pam is another woman with a lot of grit. She is a CEO, and the way she functions is she always hits a glass cliff. And what I mean by that is she comes in at a stage where the founders are unable to be successful with their company. And so she comes in with a couple of outcomes, which is, save the company or shut the company down. And she has a glass cliff problem, because this is a problem she has to come in and fix. And if she's successful, everyone's like, "Hey, we picked the right person to do this." And if she fails, then it hurts her reputation, and it's hard for her to go off and execute on something else later. And she always gets into this glass cliff situation. But she says, her whole premise was she went to Harvard Business School. She said that was the hardest thing she's ever done in her life. And as she went through the MBA degree, she had to claw her way through. And that's what she does today. Even when she's a CEO of a failing company, she claws her way through, and she loves the challenge of it. And she's just amazing. Telly Whitney, I've talked about her. She had a career intervention from her stepmom. where she went and took this inventory test and computer science came up, and she went off and got a computer science degree, and she's impacted several women since then. And I talk about just this, this parallel universe where she didn't get that intervention. And if she didn't, she would probably have never been down this path of impacting so many women in her life. So she's got an amazing story. Annabelle is this woman from LinkedIn. She's now doing her own startup company. What I liked about her story was a lot of things that she faced is something that I have faced at work myself, where, we have a picture of what leadership means. Leaders are supposed to be strong and powerful and have this gravitas. But when a woman comes in and exhibits those same qualities, then it becomes a double bind problem, because then you become very ambitious, you become very aggressive, and those qualities are not really rewarded in a woman. And her story is where she comes in, feels like the feedback she's got is she's authoritarian, she's aggressive, and she had to really work on her brand to become the leader she actually wanted to become. And she did, and she also changed a few mindsets within the company as to what it means to be a female leader, which is actually very critical, because today, if you go into a classroom and you ask kids, draw me a doctor or draw me a leader, or they'll always draw a man. And so we need to change that mindset that yes, women can be leaders as well. And there are certain characteristics that women have that are also part of being a leader. And, it doesn't have to be this one standard that we all have to abide by. And then women have to work so hard towards that standard. And when they do, it goes negatively against them. And so these are some of the things that need a lot of education. So I love talking about a story because that kind of helps you, it shines light on that. So this is actually very important to me. And when I talk about diversity and inclusion, I mean, we're talking a lot about diversity and inclusion, but we are excluding men, and we need to stop doing that. And so what men and organizations can do, and I say this, and it probably upsets a lot of, women, but the key to diversity in our workplace is men, specifically white men, because they have the power. And so we need policies within our organization to encourage diversity and help all employees, including white men. And that is something that we don't do. For instance, I was talking to this white woman and she said, Pratima, if there is a conference or there's a talk on women of color, I won't go to that because it doesn't impact me. But the truth of the fact is she needs to go to that conference because there are many things that happen to women of color that people, or people of non-color people have to listen to, because they're the ones who can actually create some of that change. And so I urge people, when they talk about diversity and inclusion, that you include men and you include everyone. And that is what diversity actually means. And so what can men and organizations do? So some of the things we can do is, having senior women and men. Senior women actually have a lot of influence where they can mentor men to uproot some of this unconscious bias. And I also stress this, that diversity programs within organizations should be truly, truly diverse. And the other thing I've noticed also is there is this talent pool that, that is so critical to our success, because these are the people who come into organizations where organizations don't allow you to thrive. They take a break, you want them to re-enter the workforce. So expanding your talent pool by doing some of these re-entry programs, and VMware is doing that. We have an initiative called Tara in India, where we're trying to get women back into work. I'm trying to do something similar in the United States for VMware. It's in process, and I'm hoping that that can work, is working with Reboot Axel and trying to get some of these women back into the workforce. And I'm excited about that. Just some closing thoughts on leadership. Wanda Austin is a former CEO of Aerospace Corporation. And she says, to be a successful leader, you must develop skills to clearly define the value of your work. So the why is important. The vision, where you're headed, in addition to being able to specify the strategic and tactical details of how to get there. And this is actually something that resonates with me very much as I lead my blockchain team, is I'm always thinking about why. Why are we doing this? And where are we going? And what do we need to do both, tactically and strategically to get there? And, so Wanda Austin's constantly mentoring and coaching me as I go through my journey. So that's my presentation. I know I took longer than I should have, but then I'll pass it over to you, Karishma.
Thank you so much for such wonderful answers, Pratima. That was really, really inspiring. Me being a woman was so much glued to your presentation and listening so carefully. That was really inspiring, I must say.
Thank you.
Great. So Pratima, we'll just head to a few question and answer round. I'll ask you a few questions so that our attendees can get more insight about the women leadership roles.
Okay, sounds good.
Pratima, could you please tell us about your book, Nevertheless, She Persisted?
Yeah, so I talked a bit about it, but my book documents, these journeys of 19 successful women in tech. And one of the goals of this book was to create role models, to inspire young girls and women to not shy away from STEM and tech. And the second goal was to help mid-career women have a sense of what has worked for other women to help them thrive thrive as successful leaders. And the women I talked to, they basically told very inspiring stories of how they accomplished their achievements, what influenced them during their childhoods. And this was important because I stressed a lot on their childhood, because I'm a big believer of, your childhood has such a big impact on what you become. And I really wanted to find out how their childhood was in terms of, the encouragement from their parents, the schools they went to, the encouragement from their teachers and professors. That was important to me. And once they got into their professional life, is like who their mentors were, and then what successes and failures they experienced along the way. And as I mentioned, as they spoke, a common theme kept emerging, which was persistence. And what I found was these women, they persisted, in the face of gender bias and stereotype threat and imposter syndrome and just negative messages from media and society. And I listened to so many of these hopeful stories, and I wanted to give these stories a voice. And I wanted a lot of people to get on this journey with me, and that was important.
Wonderful, I must say. So what magical ingredients help successful women leaders thrive in a male-dominated industry?
So I talked about sponsors. Sponsors is super critical to get. Mentors as well, but I will tell you that women are over-mentored and under-sponsored. And it is good to have mentors, but it also is very helpful to get sponsors. And people keep asking me, how do you get sponsors? One thing is you have to be really good at your craft. You have to be really, if you're in the tech field, you have to be very technically sound. And once you do that, what you need is then visibility, because a lot of people do great work, but they do it within the confines of their cubes. And this applies to men as well. And what happens is you need to actually get visibility for your work, which means you need to go showcase your work to the key players in your organization, and people like that, and talk to people, build your network. So bringing that visibility will actually help you get some sponsors. And I've actually had the same experience. When I started with VMware very early as an engineer, I came from a startup world, and I loved being in startups because I could run as fast as I could and I could wear these different hats. But when I started with VMware, I felt very disconnected from customers, and I felt like the engineering organization was so disconnected from customers. It was a very big company. It was too big for me at that point. It wasn't as big in 2008 as it is today, but the sheer size of all the processes they had was just limiting me. And I was a very young engineer. And what I did was I went and looked at these different pain points that our customers were having, which kind of set me apart from all the other engineers, because they never came from a customer-focused mindset. And once I found certain pain points, I went off and I started like this innovative project. I went to my executives and I pitched it to them. And I was not doing this to get a sponsor. I was doing this for pure love of the business. But that actually helped me get sponsors. And, you know, the sponsor that I got like the first year at VMware is still my sponsor today at VMware. And and he's my boss today, which is actually very cool, that I get to, you know, work with him every day. And I know he's constantly thinking about my growth. But what I'm trying to say is I was doing it very unconsciously and organically. But today we need to smarten up. We need to, you know, be aware of that organizationally. Who are the key players? How do you showcase your work and get that visibility? And, you know, naturally you will get a sponsor. So that's the other thing. Network is also one thing that is super critical for women. And, you know, the career interventions. And the other thing, last thing is persistence. And I will keep talking about persistence because that is so critical.
Thank you so much, Pratima. So we have one question from our one of our attendee, which I would like to ask you. Attendee says that they observed that most of the female role models in the book have supporting spouse. So it will be great to hear, you know, any women who do not have support in raising family.
Yeah, that's a great question. I talk a little bit about this, and so one of the very important things you can do for your career is finding the right partner. That I will say. But if you haven't found the right partner, and I do talk about it a little bit in the book, if you don't have that support, what you can do is actually go try and get that support. I know it's very hard. It's very hard to get that support, but what we tend to do is we tend to say no to people who want to help us. And I think there's no shame in asking for support. And I will tell you my own personal story. I have 3 kids. I have twins and I have an 8-year-old. And, you know, I have a very supportive husband, so that's there. But there are times where I am just flailing and I don't have anyone, and there are people who come and offer me support. I shamelessly take it. If it means taking the kids to the playground for a couple of hours, which means like somebody's dropping off dinner at my house because things are crazy, I actually take that support. And I also try to delegate as much as I can and try to get as much support that I can. I have an amazing support team, just not my husband, but I have a support team with just, you know, just helping me with building my brand. I have a huge support team at my work. And what's interesting is there's this woman who actually, I'm launching a podcast, and she actually brought this up. She said she has a personal board of directors. And this was very interesting to me because I perhaps have a personal board of directors, but I never call them that. But she has a personal board of directors who are constantly in her life, who help her and who actually support her, not just in her professional life, but also in her personal life. So she's figured out a way to make that happen. And I think a lot of us are very ashamed to do that because we just want to isolate ourselves. So just asking for help is okay. And trying to and you will find that you will get support from very different places that you wouldn't have even expected, but you just have to let yourself open those doors. And that's the hardest part. But once you decide you're going to open those doors, there will be many, many doors that will open for you.
Thank you so much for the lovely answer, Pratima. We have one attendee saying, giving you a message. I would read that for you, that she's so happy you are focusing on this topic of lack of support a partner. She has found it via a career coach who is French-Mexican man. So this is a message from one of our attendee for you, that she's really happy that you are focusing on this topic. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
So here comes my next question for you, Pratima. My next question is a few more highlights about the common challenges faced by women in tech industry.
So I talked a lot about that as well in the presentation. So one of them is glass ceiling is a common challenge that women face. There is unconscious bias. Our technical credibility gets questioned quite a bit. It's happened to me over and over again. We lack sponsors. That is very, very important. And because of a lot of this, we end up having confidence issues and we end up having imposter syndrome. So these are some of the things that I have seen that really limits us from progressing. And I don't want to put the entire burden on the woman. I don't want to say women have to lean in. I actually truly believe that men have to lean in, organizations have to lean in, and our society has to lean in.
That's great.
Thank you so much.
Yes, sorry. There's Sarah has raised her hand, and I'll unmute Sarah. So Sarah, please feel free to talk to Pratima and share your views.
Hi, Pratima. Hi, Aditya. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, Pratima.
Hey, I hope you're feeling better.
Thank you. I'm drinking my coffee. I'm waiting for my medicine to work. I'm glad you have them too, because my family is like, why are you telling people about your personal medical history? This is a flaw. And it's like, then I talk to more women, and so many of us suffer from migraines. I'm not alone. So why are we happy?
Yes, I suffer from migraines all the time.
And then I saw this article by Guy, I think his last name is Kawasaki, or you know who I'm talking about. I can't remember how to say his last name, but the chief evangelist for Apple, who worked with Steve Jobs. And he posted an article on women in science. And obviously we're not going into science fast enough, so we have no female neuroendocrinologists. So there's no neuroendocrinologists, they don't exist. So I have to merge manually the gynecologist and neurologist, and it's absurd. So it's like, and to your point about PhD, it's like, do I have to go to med school to solve my migraines? Like, this is expensive. So my question to you, I'm really happy that you highlighted yourself, and I think her name is Annabelle Liu, is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
What do you do? I think you both, I haven't met her, but I think she could relate, and it sounds like you can. What do you do if you're in a situation where you have, let's say you're on a project for a few months and you have 5 cases of unsolicited client feedback that's written, that's all positive, and everything's glowing, glowing, glowing. And then you deliver this deadline and you get across the finish line and you're understaffed and under-resourced, and you've carried the whole team, multiple people above you on the client, you're helping everyone. And then you get to the finish line and your male boss says to you that maybe you seemed a little bit stressed out at times and frazzled, and maybe you had a lack of empathy because, oh, as a woman, we're all supposed to be mothers and wives, which I'm thankful that you've talked about not having a partner, because I'm not married and I don't have kids. So I'm the wrong kind of woman because I'm not nurturing enough and caring enough. And in addition to doing my job, I'm not taking care of everybody's. And I'm talking about my male bosses, my female bosses, everybody above me who makes more money than me. I'm not just like talking about their feelings all the time. I'm trying to do my work. So do you have any thoughts on what I can do in a situation like that without a sponsor? I negotiated my way out.
It's actually interesting you say that your boss actually wants those qualities from you. Finally, it's all about business, right? Whether we like it or not. We're fighting for diversity because it's good for business. Bottom line, right? We find that businesses are a lot more successful when you have diversity on your team, and there's different characteristics that these diverse people exhibit. And it's interesting to me that your boss is focusing not on what you've achieved, but how you went about achieving it. There's perhaps some merit to both, as long as you didn't burn bridges and piss people off to get to your goal, and which doesn't seem that way, right? But that's your style, and you've delivered, and that is the eventual goal if you look at it, right? So it's a little surprising that your boss actually feels you have to be more empathetic and stereotype you that way just because you're a woman.
I did have a situation towards the end where there was a man that had been calling me kid for 2.5 months, negating 15 years of my work experience. And I confronted him very politely and diplomatically, but firmly. Let me be clear. I stood my ground and I was persistent. And I said, can you please not call me kid anymore? I don't appreciate that. And he said, oh, I did it because you look young. I'm happy that my anti-wrinkle cream and my Erna Laszlo is working. But, you know, my 15 years of experience is valid.
Yeah. And that's the age bias. It happens quite a bit. You know, you look older, you have a problem as well. And I'm glad you confronted it, because a lot of people don't. And that's another thing is education, right? Confronting, educating. I speak up as well, and sometimes it goes against me. Sometimes it's in my favor, but at least I can sleep well at night.
That's exactly that's what I decided. So I got told that I had lack of empathy because I stood up for myself. But to your point, I needed to be able to look myself in the mirror, go to sleep at night, and feel proud of all of the achievements I've done, and know that I helped. I drove the deadline. We hit the benefits open enrollment for this client so that all of the people that I met on the road for the whole month of October that this business acquired could say to their families, we hit the deadline because she told us the truth. She came on the road. She talked about change leadership. She delivered benefits open enrollment on time, even if she had to whip IT, PMO, HR, and change and comms into shape to do it during a changing CHRO. She delivered. And then I got told I didn't have empathy because I stood my ground for being called a kid. And then they said, well, no one heard him call you a kid, so we don't believe you.
Interesting. Yeah, and I'm glad you, you know, stood your ground, and yeah, kudos to you. That's important. And if you can sleep well at night, then so be it. The other thing also to think about is people are very data driven. And so I like to approach any problem with a lot of data. And if you have data that you were successful and you were able to turn the business around, that's what you need to show. And, you know, they want to talk about feelings, sure, but eventually you have the data to back you up.
So here's what I did, because my father was an FBI agent. You can imagine.
That's interesting.
I totally went James Comey, and I documented all of it, everything on all the servers. It's on all the servers everywhere. And then I got told that I was talking too much. And then I used analogies to communicate my point. And then I got told that I was mixing messages, and I don't know how to communicate.
Interesting.
So I felt like this was just an untenable situation. And I just needed to get out because I really didn't know what to do. Right.
And that's actually a perfect decision to make.
Really? Because other people are like, you failed. And I do feel like I failed. But I mean, I have to, like, to your point, look at myself in the mirror and go to sleep at night.
Yeah. No. And, you know, sometimes things are terrible and you have to walk away from it. And that's okay.
And honestly, the migraine spiked and it got too much. And I also had to decide my brain is more valuable than a job. Even though that's scary.
I totally agree. If it's affecting you physically, yes, that is the right decision to make, is walk away from it.
Okay, even though we're in Silicon Valley with our housing crisis and I haven't figured everything out yet.
Yes, and, you know, just get back on the horse, like, you know, go find another job and you'll find it. So I have that confidence that you will.
I had an interview with a client yesterday, a new potential client, and then I'm also working on either building my LLC or some other kind of conglomerate legal entity with a friend of mine who is a male. To your point, I made sure he's a white male engineer from Stanford, and he recently left Google after he sold his company, I think, to Facebook. Then he went to Google, and he helped me find a lawyer to establish my legal entity to build my empire.
Nice.
Oh, but I need allies.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Sarah, for sharing your question and sharing your thoughts. We really, really appreciate it.
Thanks, Aditya. I don't want to dominate. I just really appreciate that. I think we need to voice and get out this message.
Definitely.
Thank you both.
Definitely. Totally appreciate it. Thank you. Karishma, you can go ahead with the next questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Pratima, for exchange of such lovely views. So here comes my next question. Pratima, do you think that making workplace more flexible for women can help more women stay and grow in their job?
You know, that definitely will help, making the workplace flexible. I think that's a good thing. It'll help, but I do have one example of this woman called Jean Liu, who was the president of Didi in China. She basically overturned Uber in China, this amazing woman. She was, former managing director at Goldman Sachs, and she's the mother of young children. And she was recruited to run this startup. And just having her run this startup empowered the company pretty much, like, to have such a strong role model. It really boosted their business. And so what the company did was they set up a women's network, and they piloted something called a leadership course. And based on this leadership course, and actually Dee ran this course, and she did this for like 24 employees that actually ended last year, and she actually plans to run it again. And I like this story because it's, sure, we can make it flexible, we can have good work-life balance, we can have the maternity leaves, all that is very, very important. But companies also have to work hard in trying to create these role models within companies so women can actually stay. Retaining women has been very hard. You find that 57% of women in their careers leave tech, and 37% women leave tech in their first year. So making it flexible will surely help. Making environments that thrive will surely help. But also creating these role models, creating women in leadership positions really, really helps. That actually helped me as a young engineer myself. When I joined VMware, we had Diane Green running the company. She was the founder of the company. That really helped the women in the organization, and it weeded a lot of the men who had any form of bias against women, right? Because who would want to go work for a female? So that's also important, apart from just having a flexible workplace.
Thank you for the answer, Pratima. So here comes my next question. Pratima, what do you think, how can women propel their career into the executive level?
I keep saying sponsors. That's one thing that is super critical. Creating a very strong brand for yourself is also very important. There's some women in the book, they call it gravitas, but I don't quite like that word, because gravitas almost says be like a man. And you don't have to be like a man to get that same level of success. You can be a female and have your own authentic leadership. But what's important is creating this very strong technical and business brand for yourself is important. The second thing is building a strong network, having these male allies who will act as your sponsors. And then finally, just taking risks and opportunities that come your way and giving it all your best. Those are some of the critical things that you can do to climb these leadership roles, and also setting goals. I think this is important, is basically saying, if you want to be a VP of a company, then tell yourself, in 5 years, I want to become a VP, and work towards it and come up with a plan, figure out who you need to influence to get there. What do you need to get there? And work on it. I mean, this is similar for men as well. I don't think it's different, but I think for women, it's a little bit more tricky in, navigating the path to it. But if you want something and you want to get there, then set that goal and work towards it, and be smart, be organizationally aware, and figure out who can help you get there. Because, it's a game, and it's a numbers game as well. And if you really want it, I'm pretty sure you'll get it.
Great. I think that was a wonderful piece of advice. So, Pratima, what are the resources available to help women thrive to leadership roles?
So, a lot of the things, right now, like one of the resources that you can have is, companies have these mentorship programs. That's something maybe to kind of look at. I'm not a big fan of mentorship in some sense. I do have mentors, but I don't use that as much as I should. Perhaps it helps other people, but for me, I find a lot of sponsorship is what helps me. So you're saying resources within companies to help you propel?
I asked, what are the resources available to help women thrive to leadership roles?
Yeah. So Pratima, if you can talk about resources available in Bay Area, and in other parts of the US? I know there are a lot of organizations in Bay Area, like Persian
Yeah.
Women in Tech, Women Who Code.
Yeah. So I was going to talk about Women Who Code. That's a great organization that helps you, have a lot of technical discussions and meetups and things like that. So that's one thing. There are places where you can actually be a mentor. That also helps, is you can find a mentor and you can be a mentor. There are things like Everwise, which is, I think, a mentoring platform. There are a couple others that are very good. I have to look at it myself, I guess, but I don't know. I mean, is HiCounselor one of those things, Aditya, as well, where you actually help women get into technical roles? Is that something that you also help with?
We're getting our foot into the door in this particular area, and we have started our efforts in the last 1.5 months.
Mm-hmm.
And we are actually in the process or in the conversation to partner with Women Who Code, and that's definitely one of our prime agenda. And because one of our partner and women and executive is women executive Rebecca Torrey, and she is very, very passionate about it, and she gives us proper guidance how we can do it. So we'll have a very structured plan how we can help women get into the technology roles and move up in the ladder, probably in the next 15 to 20 days.
Right. And what as you're talking, I'm also thinking about trying to get a coach for yourself. I found coaches extremely useful. And I know companies have some money that's set aside for coaches. What happens, especially with a coach, what you can do is they can do like a 360 feedback, right? That means they talk to your bosses, they talk to your peers, they talk to your direct reports, they'll talk to everyone. They can actually sit in meetings and see how you conduct meetings, how your interactions with people have been. So I've done this. I've used an executive coach myself. And what I learned was extremely valuable. And that actually helps me build a brand at work, because you get some very raw feedback on what you're doing really well and what your strengths are and where you need to improve. And this is honest feedback that you will get from an independent third party and not your boss. So one other thing is what I found through research, and this doesn't make me too happy, is a lot of people are afraid to give feedback to women because, they have this underlying assumption that women are very emotional and that, at the drop of a hat, they'll start crying. And so they don't give them very constructive feedback. So if you actually get a coach and get your company to pay for it and work with this coach to help you get very objective, raw feedback that can actually help you get to the next level, I have seen that a lot of that really helps to propel women in their careers. I've done it for myself, and some of the feedback was hard for me to take, but it was feedback I needed to listen so I could become a better leader. So I would really encourage women to take that, and actually even men. I think it's important for us to really know, because we always walk around the office thinking we're doing a great job. But the truth is, we're not perfect, and we do make mistakes, and there are things that we do and we have to improve on, and that's not a bad thing.
That's great, Pratima. So just a follow-up question on this. You said we can have a coach.
Mm-hmm.
Do companies allow to have a coach from some other company, or is it mandatory to hire a coach, someone from your own organization? Because when I used to work with Deloitte and PwC, we used to have a concept of coach,
Mm-hmm.
but that coach is either like my senior manager or someone partner.
Yeah.
But yeah, what are your thoughts? Can we, does companies encourage to have a coach?
Yeah. My coach was external. She was external. And I know, like VMware does have, some companies that they work with where they get coaches from, but a lot of executives at VMware do get executive coaching that actually helps them get to the next level. and they're not internal VMware people. They are actually an external party. So I don't know if they outsource it. They have like, companies have partnerships with other companies. So maybe they get all their coaches from that company. But I found an external coach that actually coached Anna Pingsuk in the book. And she was fantastic. She worked, and, I used some of my personal money as well to hire her, but that she was extremely effective and helpful because she was literally my shadow at work, and she saw how I was doing and got me that feedback.
That's great. And so thank you so much, Pratima, for sharing this concept of coach. We'll definitely talk more offline about it as we are reaching top of the hour. And I think this also answered Shashi's question. So